It was a warm Saturday morning when John finally decided to do what he'd been dreaming about since moving into Willow Bend Estates: plant his mother's favorite heirloom roses. He'd cleared the front lawn, prepped the soil, and arranged each plant with care, digging deep into the earth like he was carving out a place for peace in this picture-perfect suburban cage. The roses were deep crimson, the kind that looked like velvet under sunlight. To John, they weren't just flowers. They were memory, tribute, therapy. He'd found the seeds in a dusty old box after his mother passed, she used to say. Red roses are the soul of the garden. So soul it was. As he stood back to admire the neat, vibrant row lining the edge of his front walkway, he smiled. Not bad, he murmured, wiping the sweat from his brow. Claire, his wife, peeked out from the kitchen window with a cup of lemonade in hand. Looks amazing, she called, but Mom would have loved it. Just then, cue the screeching tires of suburban drama. A sharp voice cut through the morning air like a fork scraping glass. Oh no, 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 absolutely not. John turned. Marching across the street was Margaret Driscoll, a 72-year-old woman with the moral compass of a tyrant and the haircut of someone permanently offended. Clipboard in hand, lips tight as a drawstring purse, she approached with the authority of someone who thought she was the HOA. Roses, she snapped, coming to a full stop on his sidewalk. Red roses. John raised an eyebrow. Is there another kind? Margaret didn't smile. She scanned the flowers like they were nuclear waste. You didn't submit a landscaping modification request. John blinked. A what now? She flipped open her clipboard like it was a badge. Section 4.2 of the Willow Bend HOA Covenant. Front yard vegetation must be approved, especially floral installations. She emphasized the words like they were dangerous chemicals. I'm just planting roses, John said, confused. They're in the ground, not taking over the street. You've disrupted the visual uniformity of the neighborhood. She declared. It's jarring. Red draws attention. We have a palette, sir. This neighborhood is about cohesion. Behind her, a neighbor's Halloween decorations, including a 12-foot inflatable skeleton, bobbed cheerfully in the wind. John glanced at it, then back at her. Seriously, she stepped forward. You have 48 hours to remove them or face a daily fine. We take violations very seriously here. Before John could respond, Margaret was already walking away, scribbling notes like she was building a legal case. As she retreated, her high heels clicked against the pavement like gunshots. Claire stepped outside holding the lemonade. What the hell just happened? John asked. Margaret, Claire said knowingly, neighborhood watchdog, runs the like she's guarding Buckingham Palace. She threatened to fine me for roses. Claire shrugged. To be fair, they are red. That's practically criminal in Margaret's world. John was fuming. I didn't move out here to be policed. About flowers. I thought HOA rules were about keeping broken down cars off lawns, not banning color. Claire took a sip of lemonade. She probably hasn't read the updated guidelines. Not that it would stop her. John looked at her. Updated. Claire gave him a mischievous smile. Don't worry about it. Just keep watering them. Claire, what aren't you telling me? But she only winked and walked back inside. John stared at the roses. They were just flowers, weren't they? Somehow he had a feeling this was going to turn into a war. And Margaret, she'd just fired the first shot. By Monday morning, John was back in the routine emails, Zoom calls, and too much coffee. He'd almost forgotten about Margaret and her crusade against his unapproved roses. That is, until he opened his mailbox. Among the usual bills and junk sat an envelope, marked Urgent HOA Notice of Violation in bold red letters, no return address. But John didn't need one. He sighed, tore it open, and read, Dear Mr. John Blake, you are in violation of Willow Bend HOA Policy Section 4.2. Unauthorized floral landscaping in the front yard. Immediate removal is required within 48 hours of receipt. Failure to comply will result in a daily fine of $500. Attached are photographic records and incident reports filed on 0610 by board member Margaret Driscoll. Kindly conform to community aesthetics. Warm regards, Willow Bend HOA Enforcement. Office hand at the bottom, written in blue pen, in unmistakable cursive, was a postscript. You seemed like a nice neighbor. Shame about the roses. John blinked. Did she just sign a passive-aggressive love note to a threat? He walked into the kitchen waving the letter. Claire, he said, you've got to see this. She took one glance, read the last line and snorted. She's flirting with you. You should write her back, maybe include a few petals. I'm serious, John groaned. $500 a day. That's more than our car payment. Claire, still sipping her morning tea, looked far too calm. Let me guess. She even attached pictures. He nodded and held them up. One was of him mid-shovel, another showed the roses from 3 angles like they were suspects in a crime lineup. There was even a close-up of the flower tag that read Midnight Velvet Rose Hybrid Tea. Claire chuckled. She took better pictures of those roses than I did at our wedding. John dropped into a chair. I'm this close to yanking them out. Not because I want to, but just to avoid the drama. Claire's expression changed. Don't you dare. Those roses mean something to you, to your mom. You're not letting some neighborhood dictator bully you into submission. He leaned forward. Then what do we do? Fight it? She's on the board. She probably wrote the damn rulebook. Claire smiled slowly, the kind of smile that only shows up when someone knows something you don't. She thinks she wrote it, but she's working off the old version. We revised those landscaping rules last year. John stared. How do you know that? Because I wrote them. He blinked. You what? Claire stood, walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a blue binder labeled HOA Garden Committee 2024 Updates. I'm the head of the garden committee, she said casually, flipping it open. Margaret was outvoted last year after trying to ban sunflowers for being too cheerful. We rewrote the landscaping section. As of last spring, roses of any color are approved. John stared at her like she'd just revealed she'd worked for the CIA. And you didn't tell me this. Why? Claire shrugged. I was waiting to see how far Margaret would go. You know, for science. John leaned back, eyes wide. So, I'm not actually in violation. Claire tapped the binder. Not even close. He exhaled, then grinned. God, I love you. Claire winked. Hold that thought. You haven't even seen what happens at the next HOA meeting. John looked down at the roses blooming outside the window. Suddenly, they didn't just represent his mother anymore. They were about to become a symbol of something else entirely. He stood up, stretching. Well, Margaret wanted a war. Claire handed him a fresh cup of coffee. Then let's give her one. By Tuesday morning, the tension in Willow Bend Estates was palpable. John thought Margaret might have retreated after the violation notice, but instead, she doubled down and then some. Margaret was already a force to be reckoned with in the neighborhood, known for her sharp tongue and a tendency to turn molehills into mountains. She ran the HOA's unofficial morality patrol, but this time her campaign against John's roses had escalated into a full-blown crusade. John got the first hint when a stack of printed emails appeared on his porch, neatly arranged in an envelope addressed to neighbors concerned about Willow Bend aesthetics. It was Margaret's latest salvo. The subject line read, "Illegal roses equals slippery. Slope for our neighborhood." Inside were pages and pages of quotes from HOA rules, excerpts from neighborhood newsletters, and photos of John's crimson roses, circled in red ink with angry arrows pointing to them. John's neighbor, Mr. Patel, waved the packet around the weekly community barbecue. "You've got to see this," he said, shaking his head. "Margaret's turning a flower garden into a neighborhood scandal." Claire glanced at the papers and smirked. "She's trying to rally support. Classic Margaret." John was fuming. "But what can I do? She's got half the neighborhood on her side now, and she's the one handing out these petitions." "Oh, that petition," Claire said, taking a sip of lemonade. "I've heard about it. She's been knocking door to door, collecting signatures to force a special HOA meeting." John ran his hands through his hair. "This is ridiculous. It's just roses." Claire's eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. "It's not about roses anymore. It's about control, and she's biting off more than she can chew." Later that day, John came home from work to find Margaret standing in his driveway, clipboard in hand. She wore a tight expression that screamed business. "John," she said, voice sharp, "we need to talk about these unauthorized plants." John stepped onto the porch, arms crossed. "Margaret, you and I both know the roses are approved." Claire already showed the board the updated guidelines. Margaret narrowed her eyes. "The board hasn't officially ruled on this yet, and you haven't submitted a landscaping change request, which is required under policy." John sighed. "Claire is chair of the garden committee. She drafted those policy changes and they were adopted last year. You must have missed the memo." Margaret scoffed. "Don't be so sure. I've been on this board longer than you've lived here, and I know the rules better than anyone." "Maybe," John said quietly, "but rules change, and this neighborhood changes too." Before Margaret could reply, Claire stepped out the front door, calm but firm. "Margaret, your petition won't change the fact that the roses comply with the updated HOA code." Margaret's gaze flicked to Claire, then back to John. "You're both playing fast and loose with the rules." Claire smiled. "No, Margaret, you're playing fast and loose with facts." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "You to better watch your backs." John felt a mix of frustration and determination. This wasn't going to be over anytime soon. In the following days, John noticed an uptick in neighborhood whispers. Margaret's emails were more frequent and fiery, loaded with phrases like "protect our community standards" and "stop the garden anarchy." But neighbors seemed weary of the drama. Some had even quietly approached Claire, asking if there was truth to the war on roses. Claire patiently explained the updates, eased their concerns, and even offered to help anyone interested with their own landscaping approvals. John realized that Margaret's warpath was creating more resistance than support. The final straw came when John found a flyer taped to his front door, a call for a special HOA meeting to discuss the illegal roses and landscaping violations in Willow Bend. John looked at Claire. "Well, looks like the gloves are off." Claire smiled. "Good time to bring the real facts to light." John stood tall, eyes on the crimson roses swaying gently in the evening breeze. The battle lines were drawn, and this time, John and Claire were ready to fight. The evening of the special HOA meeting arrived, and the Willow Bend Estates Community Center buzzed with a mix of anticipation, gossip, and simmering tension. The room was packed, neighbors in folding chairs, clutching coffee cups and petitions, whispering about the latest neighborhood scandal, John's red roses. John sat next to Claire near the back, their hands intertwined. He could feel the weight of the moment settling in. This was not just about flowers anymore, it was about standing up to Margaret's iron-fisted control. Margaret, dressed in her usual blazer and pearls, stood near the front podium with an air of authority that only she believed she possessed. Her clipboard was stuffed with papers, her signature glare ready to cut through anyone who dared oppose her. The HOA president, a kind-faced middle-aged woman named Diane, called the meeting to order. We're here tonight to discuss a landscaping violation reported by board member Margaret Driscoll, specifically, the unauthorized planting of red roses on John Blake's property. Margaret wasted no time launching into her speech. These roses, planted without HOA approval, are a direct violation of our community guidelines. They disrupt the neighborhood's uniform aesthetic and set a dangerous precedent. If we allow this, what's next? Flamingos, gnomes, anarchy. Murmurs of agreement rippled through some of the crowd. John tightened his grip on Claire's hand. Then Claire stood, her voice calm but commanding. If I may. All eyes shifted toward her. She stepped forward with confidence, holding a thick binder, the same one she had shown John. As chair of the HOA Garden Committee, I want to clarify several points. First, the landscaping guidelines were reviewed and updated last year. The revised rules specifically approve roses of any variety, color, and placement, as long as they meet safety and size requirements. She opened the binder to a page marked with a bright pink tab. Here was the updated codebook signed by the majority of the board, including Ms. Driscoll herself. A collective gasp came from the crowd. Margaret's face flushed a deep red. That's not possible. I never agreed to this. Claire met her gaze evenly. Actually, Margaret, you voted in favor of these changes in last year's meeting minutes. Here, I have the documentation. Claire handed a copy of the minutes to Diane, who nodded in confirmation. John felt a swell of pride and relief. The truth was on their side. Margaret's mouth opened and closed, searching for a response, but nothing came out. Claire continued. These roses were not only approved, they were celebrated as a way to bring more color and vibrancy to our neighborhood. From the back, a few neighbors nodded. Some even clapped softly. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Well, that was before I fully understood the consequences. John cleared his throat. Margaret, this isn't personal. These roses are a tribute to my mother, a woman who loved this community, could have talked to us instead of sending violation letters and petitions. Margaret's eyes darted around, realizing she was losing her audience. The room grew quiet. Diane spoke up. I think it's clear the board supports John and Claire's position. Margaret muttered something about checking emails more carefully and stormed out, clipboard in hand, trailing an awkward silence behind her. John turned to Claire, whispering, how did you stay so calm? She smiled softly. Because I knew the truth and because Margaret didn't. After the meeting, neighbors approached John and Claire, expressing their support. Some admitted they were tired of Margaret's constant policing. Others excitedly asked Claire for gardening tips that night. As John watered the roses under the moonlight, he realized something had changed, not just in the garden, but in the whole neighborhood. The war over the roses had ended, but a new chapter had begun. And now, with Claire leading the garden committee, Willow Bend Estates was finally ready to bloom in more ways than one. The morning after the HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt a little lighter, like a storm had passed, and the sun was finally breaking through the clouds. John felt relieved, but Claire knew the battle wasn't completely over. Margaret's pride had been bruised, and in her world, that meant she was about to strike back. At breakfast, Claire sipped her coffee and glanced at John. You should expect some backlash, she warned. John groaned. She's already been at me for weeks. What else could she possibly do? Claire gave him a sly smile. Oh, you'd be surprised. Later that day, John received an email from the HOA president, Diane. The subject line read, Official clarification on landscaping guidelines. John opened it, expecting a dry update. Instead, it was a detailed letter reaffirming the recent changes Claire had championed, complete with links to the updated HOA code and reminders to residents that the community's guidelines now embraced diverse gardening styles, including roses of any color. At the bottom, Diane added a personal note. Let's work together to make Willow Bend a welcoming and vibrant community for all. John felt a warm glow. Things were finally looking up. But Margaret was not ready to admit defeat. That afternoon, John found a thick packet slipped under his door. It was addressed in Margaret's unmistakable handwriting. Inside, he discovered a lengthy document filled with old HOA rules, letters from disgruntled neighbors, and a carefully compiled evidence folder intended to discredit Claire's authority. But buried deep inside was a little bombshell, a handwritten note from Margaret herself, accusing Claire of conflicts of interest because she was both John's wife and head of the garden committee. John's eyes narrowed. He read the accusation aloud. It's unethical for Claire to enforce rules that benefit her family. This is favoritism, not governance. Claire laughed when John showed her she's grasping at straws, and honestly, it's kind of pathetic. But Claire had a plan. The next day at the HOA board meeting, Claire arrived with her binder and an unexpected guest. The HOA's legal advisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen who had reviewed all the documents when Margaret attempted to raise the conflict of interest accusation. Karen cut her off politely but firmly. The garden committee is an advisory board, not an enforcement body. Claire's role is to recommend policies to the HOA board, which votes on them collectively. There is no violation of ethics here. Margaret stammered. But Karen raised a hand. Furthermore, Margaret, the minutes show you were present and voted on all recent landscaping changes. Your attempt to question the legitimacy of the new guidelines is not supported by any factual basis. Claire smiled. In other words, Margaret, your accusations are baseless. We're here to build community, not tear it apart. The board unanimously voted to reaffirm the updated landscaping rules and dismissed any complaints about favoritism. Margaret sat back in her chair, flushed and silent. It was the clearest defeat she'd faced in years. After the meeting, John and Claire walked out together, victorious. John shook his head in disbelief. You really dropped the hammer on her. Claire grinned. Sometimes you have to let the paperwork do the talking. The next morning the roses seemed to bloom a little brighter. John looked at Claire and said, I'm glad you're on our side. She leaned in and whispered, always. But as they celebrated, a small thought lingered in John's mind. Margaret wasn't done yet, and in the world of HOAs, peace was often just the calm before the next storm. Despite the clear ruling from the HOA board, Margaret Driscoll was far from finished. In fact, the day after the official meeting, John noticed the tone of neighborhood conversations had shifted from curious to downright tense. Word had spread fast that Margaret was furious. More than furious, she was furious and desperate. John saw it first when he found a handwritten flyer taped to his mailbox. It was poorly spelled and scrawled in angry red ink. Stop the HOA takeover. Protect our neighborhood values. Say no, it's no to the new rules. He crumpled it and tossed it on the kitchen counter, but the damage was done. Claire frowned, flipping it over. She's rallying the last of her supporters. Claire said quietly, this is going to get ugly. And ugly it got. That afternoon, John heard loud banging on their front door. He opened it to find Margaret, face flushed with rage and eyes blazing. John, she hissed, this isn't over. You and Claire think you've won, but you've destroyed the neighborhood's character. John took a step back, trying to keep calm. Margaret, the board, had spoken. The new guidelines are official. Official, she shouted. I've lived here longer than you've been alive. I've built this community's standards and you're bulldozing over them like it's nothing. Claire came to the door, steady, but firm. Margaret, threatening neighbors isn't how we handle disagreements. You need to respect the process. Margaret's glare sharpened. Respect? I'll show you respect when this neighborhood looks like it used to. You and your roses are the beginning of the end. John frowned. It's just flowers, Margaret. No, she spat. It's control, and I will not let you have it. The confrontation escalated quickly. Neighbors drawn by the shouting gathered on the sidewalk. Some looked sympathetic to Margaret, others embarrassed. Finally, Diane, the HOA president, stepped forward. Margaret, please, we've had enough. This behavior is disruptive and unacceptable. Margaret's expression faltered for a split second, but then hardened. You'll regret this. With that, she stormed off, slamming her door behind her. Neighborhood was shaken. Margaret's meltdown wasn't just a personal attack, it was a signal that the war for Willow Bend was far from over. In the following days, Margaret became increasingly erratic. She posted angry messages on the community bulletin board, accusing Claire and John of bullying and corrupt governance. She contacted local media, hoping to stir up a controversy. John and Claire tried to keep their heads down, focusing on the roses and the community they loved, but it was clear Margaret was digging in for a long fight. One evening, Claire sat John down. We need a plan. Margaret's not going to back down. John nodded, exhaustion weighing on him. I'm ready. Claire smiled, her determination shining through. Good, because I know just how to end this. But little did they know, Margaret was already plotting her next move, and it would shake the neighborhood to its core. After Margaret's public meltdown, the atmosphere in Willow Bend Estates was heavy with unease. The neighborhood was split. Some rallied behind John and Claire, eager for a fresh start, while others felt torn, unsure which side to support. John and Claire spent evenings strategizing, but they knew their next move needed more than passion, it needed allies. One sunny Saturday morning, Claire invited John to join her at the weekly neighborhood farmers market. It was usually a calm, friendly event, but today, Claire had her eyes peeled for someone specific. Keep an open mind, she said as they strolled past stalls of fresh produce and handmade crafts. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. As they approached a booth selling succulents, Claire spotted a woman in her late 60s, wearing a bright floral scarf and a warm smile. She was arranging plants with the precision of a seasoned gardener. John, meet Helen, Claire said, introducing them. She's new to the neighborhood but has a ton of experience with HOA disputes, and she's on our side. Helen shook John's hand firmly. I've been through the HOA ringer before, in my last community. Margaret's tactics remind me of someone I know all too well. John raised an eyebrow. So, what's your plan? Helen smiled slyly. First, we need to gather undeniable community support. People respect facts, but they respond to personal stories and unity. Over the next few days, Helen, Claire, and John worked tirelessly. Helen reached out to neighbors, hosting small garden tours and tea gatherings. She shared stories of past HOA conflicts and how communities had triumphed through cooperation and clear communication. Her charisma was magnetic. Even some of Margaret's staunchest supporters began to listen. One afternoon, as John weeded his rose beds, Helen approached with a clipboard. We're putting together a community newsletter, she explained. It'll feature gardening tips, HOA updates, and spotlight neighbors making positive changes. John chuckled. Sounds like a good way to drown out Margaret's noise. Helen nodded. Exactly. We're taking back the narrative. Meanwhile, Margaret grew more isolated. Her messages on the bulletin board went unanswered, and fewer neighbors attended her gatherings. At the next HOA meeting, Helen surprised everyone by requesting to speak. Standing confidently before the board, she addressed the crowd. Margaret's efforts have caused division, but it's clear the community wants progress, not regression. Let's celebrate diversity in our gardens and work together to make Willow Bend a place everyone is proud to call home. The room erupted in applause. Margaret sat rigid, her expression unreadable. For the first time, she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. After the meeting, Helen approached Claire. You've got a strong team here. With unity, you can put an end to this once and for all. Claire smiled, relief washing over her. Thank you, Helen. We couldn't have done it without you. John joined them, looking at the blooming roses just beyond the window. It feels like the neighborhood is finally turning a corner. Helen nodded. It is, and your roses are a symbol of that change. As the sun set over Willow Bend Estates, John, Claire, and Helen stood together, ready to face whatever challenges came next, because now, they weren't just fighting for roses. They were fighting for their community. The atmosphere in Willow Bend Estates had changed. The bitter tension that had gripped the neighborhood for weeks was finally easing, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. John stood on his porch admiring the vibrant blooms of his rose bushes swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. The same roses that had sparked an unexpected war were now a symbol of resilience and community. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Margaret's relentless campaign had fizzled out after the intervention of Helen and the growing support of the neighbors. Her once commanding presence was now reduced to quiet, solitary afternoons behind closed doors. Claire came out of the house, holding a stack of freshly printed newsletters, the ones Helen had helped create. The cover featured a bright photo of John's roses, with the headline, "Blooming Together, How Willow Bend Grows Stronger." John smiled. Looks like we're making progress. Claire handed him a copy. This newsletter is more than just gardening tips. It's a celebration of what we can accomplish when we work together, and it's helping change minds. As the sun dipped lower, neighbors began arriving for the community's first official garden festival, an idea Claire and Helen had spearheaded, to bring everyone together in celebration of the neighborhood's natural beauty. Tables lined the street, bursting with flowers, homemade treats, and crafts. Children ran around with painted faces, while adults shared stories and laughter. Music filled the air, and for the first time in months, Margaret's name was nowhere to be heard. Diane, the HOA president, approached John and Claire with a warm smile. This is exactly the kind of community spirit we need. You two have done a wonderful job. Claire nodded. It's been a team effort. Helen's support made all the difference. John looked around at the neighbors, once divided, but now united. I think this is the start of something new, not just for the garden, but for all of us. As twilight settled, a gentle breeze carried the scent of roses through the air. Margaret's house sat quietly at the end of the street. Her windows darkened. The war had ended, but the peace was fragile. Just then, a soft knock came at John's door. He opened it to find Margaret standing there, holding a small pot of rosebuds. I wanted to say, she began hesitantly, that maybe I was too harsh. The neighborhood does look nicer with your roses, and maybe change isn't always bad. John blinked in surprise but smiled warmly. Thank you, Margaret, that means a lot. Claire joined them, extending her hand. We're all neighbors here. It's never too late to grow together. Margaret, and hesitated, then shook Claire's hand. I think I'd like to help with the garden committee. Maybe learn a thing or two. John grinned. Welcome aboard. As Margaret walked away, John closed the door with a sense of closure. The battle was over, but more importantly, a new chapter was beginning, one rooted in understanding, respect, and the simple beauty of blooming roses. Willow Bend Estates was no longer just a neighborhood divided by rules and complaints. It was a community, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together.